Well, let me start this press conference. This is the press conference. Let me begin with good morning, everyone. This is the press conference that I have before a legislative meeting. And tomorrow, October 1st, we will have our regular legislative meeting for the month of October. The meeting is scheduled to begin at 12 o'clock or immediately following the committee of the whole. So we'll have an additional, meaning a not regularly scheduled meeting of the committee of the whole tomorrow, supposedly starting at 11 o'clock in the morning. There will be a number of measures, roughly 12 or 13, that will be coming out of other committees. Most of them are resolutions. There are a couple of bills. Probably the most significant of the bills coming out of other committees that will be going through the committee of the whole to the regular meeting agenda is a bill that came out of the Committee on Transportation and the Environment, chaired by Councilmember Charles Allen, the Comprehensive Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Access Readiness and Sustainability Amendment Act of 2024, which is intended to improve the infrastructure for electric vehicles in the district. My understanding is it has a substantial fiscal impact, which means that it will not be effective until it is funded. And given the price tag, that may be a bit of a challenge, but at any event, we'll be moving forward with that. There is a resolution coming out of the Committee on Public Works and Operations, chaired by Councilmember Nadeau, that would confirm Jonathan Rogers as the director of the Department of For-Hire Vehicles. There's been some attention to that agency recently because of some controversy around the Empower ride-hailing app. The Committee of the Whole itself will be marking up 4 measures, one of which is confirmation of the mayor's nomination of Gwen Marcus Wright to be on the zoning commission. Besides the fact that she's very qualified, she's been a longtime resident of the district, but also was planning director for Montgomery County for, I believe, 2 decades. But this will be finally filling a seat that's been vacant on the zoning commission for 3 or 4 years. The Committee of the Whole is also marking up a very, very controversial piece called the Redback Salamander Official State Amphibian Designation Act of 2024. All right, I wasn't completely serious when I said very, very, very controversial. There actually was a room full of kids that were supporting this when the committee had its hearing. And this idea of having an official state amphibian was an idea that came out of I think it was the 3rd grade class at Powell Elementary School. We do have a number of official animals for various categories, like an official mammal and an official dinosaur. And I know that's not really a current animal. At any event, that will be coming out of the Committee of the Whole. At the legislative meeting, almost everything will be on the consent agenda. So I'm not going to note any of that. And a number on the non-consent agenda at the moment, we only have emergency legislation, which, as you all know, but for the benefit of anybody who's watching, are temporary bills. They become effective as soon as the mayor signs them, but they're only in effect for 90 days because they don't go through the congressional review process. And most of these emergency bills are simply continuations of emergency bills that have been previously adopted. There are, of course, a couple of exceptions. I'll save the best for last. One of the emergencies is the DC circulator transition emergency, which Councilmember Allen is moving, which would set aside assets from the sale of the circulator system for the benefit of employees who will become former employees who, if they go to WMATA, will probably be taking a cut in pay. I think the only other emergency that is substantial and new is the emergency rental assistance reform legislation, which I'm moving tomorrow. And there's already been some attention to this. The bill does 2 things. It repeals a provision in the law that was added about 3 years ago during the COVID crisis, during the pandemic, that allows applicants for ERAP to self-certify their eligibility. self-certifying as to a number of criteria. So it's, as I said, repealing a provision that's only been around for maybe 3 years. In fact, I'm not even sure, 3 years. And the other provision is to change from mandatory repeated applications to ERAP as a stay for eviction proceedings for non-payment of rent, and instead to allow one stay, which would be at a judge's discretion. As I think you all know, the impetus for this legislation is the fact that on the landlord side of the equation, and when I say landlord, I'm talking about both the housing providers as well as developers of pretty much affordable housing, that is housing that is designated for working and lower income families, that there's an increasing crisis of non-payment of rent. And with that, now seeing a drying up of capital, access to capital to maintain, to either develop or maintain these properties. And so in these two ways, which I think are very limited, tending to open things up a bit. I would add that what would also help with regard to the problem that we're having is if the United States Senate would get around to confirming all the judges that have been nominated and have been submitted to the Senate and that have gone through committee in the Senate, confirming all of them so that there are fewer vacancies on the Superior Court, because that too is contributing to the backlog. So what's happening is that where it used to take maybe 2 to 4 months, when a case is filed for non-payment of rent to get to an eviction, it's now taking possibly a year or longer to get an eviction for non-payment of rent. And what's also happening is that we're seeing that there are some tenants who are racking up rent arrearages of $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, which is, in my mind, just mind-blowing how much debt has been forced to be carried by the landlords. I probably didn't say that quite right. Rent arrearages that are owed or receivables that are owed to the landlord that they have to carry. So if I remember correctly, in the affordable housing community, among just some of the affordable housing providers, the total amount that they're carrying in arrearages is somewhere around, I think, $10 million, maybe more, which is too hard for these providers to carry. So we're trying to open it up. I think we could go farther, but this is what's before the council tomorrow. I'm happy to take questions on any of this. I want to note that at the moment, the next meeting is a committee of the whole meeting will be on October 15th. There may be a legislative meeting then. And then the next scheduled meeting after that is November 12th. And I expect there might be a meeting before then. With that, I'm happy to take questions. Alex?
Hi. So just wanted to ask about the ERAP bill. I think Legal Aid and others have raised the issue that some of the delays that they're seeing in processing the ERAP applications are on the landlord side of things, and that as written, there's nothing in the bill to, sort of address the delays coming from the landlords versus the tenants. Is that a concern that you're hoping to address? Would you consider a change or not so much?
Let me see. It's interesting that maybe I'll answer this a little bit differently. We're only talking about, with regard to this legislation, suits for eviction where there's non-payment of rent. And right now the challenge is that if a tenant indicates that he or she has applied to ERAP, there's a stay automatically granted. And this can happen over and over. So ERAP has a portal, online portal, and it opens 4 times a year. So that's potentially 4 stays a year, 4 stays next year, 4 stays the following year. And meanwhile, the rent doesn't get paid, although it could be partially paid, but we know that at least some instances it's not paid at all. So it doesn't really matter what the landlord does. Now, what we have proposed is that there could be at the discretion of the judge 1 stay. I think that if a tenant says to the court, I have applied, but I can't demonstrate eligibility because the landlord is not responding. I think that then puts the burden back on the landlord. The judge saying, well, landlord, why are you not responding? So I don't think that that's an impossible situation for the tenant.
Yeah, I mean, some of the providers have said they feel like if needing to go through that back and forth will only slow the process down further, whereas
Well,
they're
I've
able
heard
to
that as well,
self-address
and I
it.
find that a little mystifying that somehow this is going to slow the process down. The fact of the matter is that right now, these cases can take upwards of a year or longer, but that's because of the multiple stays. It's not going to be that long with this legislation. So making the process take longer is an argument that I don't understand.
Are you expecting any amendments to the bill before tomorrow, even on the dais?
I hope not. As I indicated, I think the bill could go further based on what I've heard from the affordable housing provider community. There are other things that we could do to improve access to capital as well as move things along more quickly. So I view this bill as being quite limited in where it's going. Having said that, it's possible that there'll be some amendments. So we'll see. Megan?
Yeah, I'm interested. This is obviously very forward-looking for how the process will change in the immediate future. But I'm also interested to know if there's anything that council is looking at to give affordable housing providers more immediate relief from the arrearages, given the district also has skin in the game on these affordability covenants, and some projects appear to be at risk of foreclosure.
Well, 2 or 3 things I want to say. First of all, and I could have said this earlier, what we have before us tomorrow is an emergency and temporary. The emergency is in effect for 90 days. So assuming that it goes into effect this month, it would last through the year. The temporary would take longer because it has to go through congressional review. We will benefit from those 90 days and seeing exactly how this plays out. Some of the criticism, such as the question that Alex relayed from some of the advocates, I think is not going to bear out, but we'll have 90 days to see exactly what happens. I do not think that there's going to be a huge spike in evictions, for example, but we'll see. I think that the court process will move more quickly, but I also think because of other factors like vacancies, that will the immediacy of that benefit won't be fully seen. In any event, we'll have 90 days to see, and based on that, be able to make further adjustments. There was more to your question, which I forgot.
Well, some of the affordable housing developers and others have said that projects could be at risk of
Yes.
foreclosure.
So right now, the only other action the council could take would be legislative to change the law. My understanding is that the mayor has made some adjustments with regard to what the Housing Production Trust Fund is used for to help with some of the, I'll call it capital needs of providers. The details of that I don't know, and the mayor has not briefed the council about this, which she should. But so on the financial side, I believe the mayor is taking some steps. The council can't do anything until it has a budget, or unless it has a budget before it. We are unable to, as you know, we are unable to take any action that affects appropriations without the mayor submitting a budget to us. So the only options the council would have would be legislative.
Just one other quick question on the medical cannabis bill. What was the fate of the debate on packaging that could appeal to children, as well as allowing daycare centers to be having a voice in that
What
protest
was
process.
the fate? Well, I'm pleased to say that the medical cannabis bill is alive and well. That's one answer to what is the fate. I believe there will be an amendment tomorrow dealing with packaging. And what that is, just for anybody who's watching, is there was some concern expressed at first reading that there ought to be some restrictions on packaging so that even though kids are not allowed into a dispensary, if an adult purchases, let's say edibles, takes them home, if it's in a brightly colored, let's be appealing to kids packaging, that would not be a good thing. So I believe there will be an amendment about that tomorrow. And my understanding is it has been worked out so that there won't be controversy around it. You asked about daycare centers. I believe there will be some adjustment there. Don't press me on the details because I don't have it in front of me. But I don't know if that's been largely worked out or not, but I think there'll be something tomorrow on that.
Are you still opposing it? Is that part of the hangup?
Well, I haven't seen what the final language is. So I know there was a version that I was okay with. But I don't know if that's what's going to move tomorrow. I do want to note, because this is a little bit in the weeds, the issue here has to do with dispensaries and whether they can locate close to, or how close they, whether there would be a buffer between them and a dispensary and a childcare center. And I get that there are folks who are concerned that we don't want cannabis in a daycare center, but the dispensaries are already heavily regulated. The licensed ones are already heavily regulated as to how much advertising they can have on their exterior, which is essentially none. And so it's not like these are attractive sites for kids. And I would argue even that for toddlers who are daycare centers, they're not interested in this kind of dispensary. So I think the concern is a little bit overstated. Nonetheless, the bill that got marked up on first reading does have a buffer between a dispensary and a childcare center. And I do think there'll be some language tomorrow that will increase. I'm getting a no sign. As I said, there's a buffer, 400-foot buffer for schools. Apparently not for daycare. So there'll be something tomorrow.
There will be something tomorrow
Yes,
on the
but I'm not
daycare.
exactly sure what will be. I can't say. You asked me if I'd be supporting it and I haven't seen the language.
Okay.
Gosh, I was reading the report this morning. You can see how well I retained it. Yes, Mr. Seagraves.
Chairman, good morning. You talked about, back to ERAP, you talked about the cost to the landlords and the providers. You put a figure out there about $10 million. The other side of that are families who'd be, do you have a number of how many families would be impacted by this? How many residents would be facing eviction through this process, will be impacted by this legislation?
I do not have a number, and I don't know how easily such a number could be obtained. That's with regard to how many families would be, or tenants, let's say households, because it could be a single person household. But I think that the number that could be affected is very different than the number that will be affected. And what do I mean by that? The legislation allows that an individual can apply for ERAP, that's the current situation, and that the tenant can work out a payment plan with the landlord. So let's say right now eligibility for ERAP is 5 times the market rate for that apartment. And so the rent that's owed is within that limit. That person, well, they're affected, but they actually won't be affected. And then let's say that they owe more than that, a little bit more than that. They work out a payment plan with the landlord. So they could be affected, but they won't be affected. So the total number that could be affected is different than the number that will actually be faced with eviction.
And is there any thought, and I get the budget times are hard, but is there any thought to trying to find money to fix this problem rather than making it easier for the landlords to evict the tenants, make it, find the money to pay the rent so that nobody needs to be
Well,
evicted?
I think there are two answers to that. One is that a lot of what this bill tomorrow addresses are changes in the law that we made during the pandemic when we wanted to make it harder to evict. So we've made it harder to evict. We've made it harder for landlords to have that ultimate tool to collect rent than it was before the pandemic. And where this bill is that basically for tomorrow is somewhat going back to where we were before the pandemic. That's one answer to you. The other answer is that we have struggled with putting more money in the budget for rental assistance and other programs that would help tenants in these situations. And the problem has only gotten worse. I don't know offhand averages, but we get reports of some individual tenants who owe $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. I think the number of tenants before the pandemic like that was non-existent. And it's very hard, very difficult to for the government to provide financial assistance in cases like that. So I would describe this legislation as essentially shifting the balance a bit back to where it was. Even though I suspect that some of the rhetoric gives the sense that we're just throwing out everything and making it super easy for landlords to just evict everybody, which is not true. Did I provoke any other questions? Then we might be good for the moment. I understand there's another press conference at 11 that the mayor's having that I will be at. I'll be there. Thank you all very much. See you tomorrow or in 20 minutes.